A government form. A quill. A question. Not your name, not your land, not your God or your language or the face your children would carry forward. Just 4 words written at the top of a column on a census sheet in a parish office in southwestern Louisiana, sometime around 1820. What are you? In the piney borderlands between 2 nations, a strip of land so ungoverned it had no legal name for 15 years. A community of several hundred people looked at that question and understood, with absolute clarity, that the wrong answer could end everything. Their land, their freedom, the legal fiction that had kept them alive. What they wrote down that day is preserved in parish archives. What they were, genetically, historically, ancestrally, is only now beginning to come into focus. And the picture that is emerging is nothing like the story anyone told about them. This is the story of the Redbone people. And the DNA did not simplify it. It made it stranger, and more human, and more American than almost anything we have in the record. For generations, the accepted account has been straightforward enough to teach in a single paragraph. The Redbone people are a triracial isolate community, meaning a group formed from the mixture of European settlers, African Americans, and Native Americans who settled in the remote parishes of southwestern Louisiana and adjacent eastern Texas in the early 19th century. The founding families are known by name: the Ashworths, the Dials, the Perkins, the Sweats. The Bunch family, whose patriarch John Bunch had petitioned the Virginia Council generations earlier for the right to marry a white woman. These surnames appear in land grants, court records, and census rolls from the 1810s onward, anchoring the community to specific geography, the parishes of Sabine, Vernon, and Calcasieu in Louisiana, clustered along the Sabine River. The migration route is documented. Following the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, these families came west from the Pendleton district of South Carolina, moving into what was then called the Neutral Ground, a lawless buffer strip between American Louisiana and Spanish Texas that had no legal government, no census takers, and crucially, no racial classification system. It was for people who did not fit neatly into the binary of white or black that American law was beginning to enforce, a kind of breathing room. Ethnographer Don C. Marler spent years compiling this story in his 2003 work Redbones of Louisiana, drawing on parish archives, oral histories, and census records stretching back to the 1810s. His conclusion was patient and empirical. These were people of mixed heritage who had settled a frontier, maintained distinct family networks, and resisted external classification for 2 centuries. It is a coherent story, a documented story, the kind of story that, once you have heard it, seems to account for everything. The name was recorded. The migration was mapped, the surnames were traced, the parishes were confirmed. And then the DNA came back. Here is where it gets complicated. When modern descendants of Redbone families began submitting DNA to consumer testing platforms, Ancestry DNA, 2, 3, and Me, the results aligned with the broad outlines of the accepted story. Admixture analyses showed primarily European ancestry, somewhere in the range of 80 to 90%, with African ancestry in the single digits to low teens, and Native American ancestry in the range of 5 to 10% or less. These numbers vary significantly by individual, as they do in any community shaped by endogamy, meaning generations of marriage within the same close network. But when researchers looked at the paternal and maternal lines separately, specifically at Y chromosome DNA and mitochondrial DNA, the picture fractured. A haplogroup, in genetics, is like a surname passed down not in writing, but in the body itself. Your Y chromosome haplogroup comes entirely from your father's 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 line, unbroken and unmixed. Your mitochondrial haplogroup comes entirely from your mother's 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 line. They do not blend. They do not average. They tell you, with precision, where one specific line of your ancestry originated. In 2012, researchers Roberta Estes, Jack Goins, Penny Ferguson, and Janet Lewis Crane published a study in the Journal of Genetic Genealogy titled Melungeons, a multi-ethnic population analyzing the closely related Melungeon community, the Appalachian cousin group from which the Redbone lineage descends. The findings were stark. The maternal lines, the mitochondrial DNA, were entirely European. Everyone. But the paternal lines told a different story. The majority of male haplogroups traced to African origin. Only one male in the study showed a Native American haplogroup in the direct paternal line, not European, not Indian, African, overwhelmingly. Jack Goins himself, the archivist who founded the DNA Project and had Melungeon ancestry through multiple family lines, expected his own Y chromosome haplogroup to be Native American or European. His family oral history pointed there. The result came back E1B1A, Sub-Saharan African, paternal line. Unambiguous. The Native American ancestry, the community, had claimed most loudly, most persistently, most legally. In the direct maternal and paternal lines, nearly absent, not uncertain, not low. Nearly absent. The first theory says the genetics make sense once you understand the founding conditions. The Redbone families, according to this explanation, descend primarily from free black Virginians of Angolan origin, people who arrived in Jamestown as early as 1619, before chattel slavery was codified, in a window when Africans in Virginia could own land, employ servants, and petition courts. Those first Angolan arrivals, 15 men and 17 women, Mbundu and Bakongo speakers from what is now Angola, were not enslaved in the permanent hereditary sense. Some gained their freedom. Some accumulated land. Some married white women, which accounts for the European maternal DNA. Their mixed heritage descendants formed a distinct freeborn community over 4 or 5 generations. Then, the legal walls closed in. Virginia's racial laws tightened through the late 1600s and into the 1700s, steadily reclassifying mixed heritage families as non-white, stripping property rights, contracting freedom. By the 1790s, the choice was stark. Stay and lose everything, or move west into unclassified territory. The Neutral Ground of Louisiana was the escape valve. This theory is genuinely powerful. It accounts for the African Y chromosomes. It accounts for the European mitochondrial DNA. It accounts for the westward migration pattern. It places the Redbones within a coherent arc of American history, a community formed in freedom, then pressured into geographic exile by the machinery of race law. But it leaves one problem standing, and it is not a small one. If this is simply a story of mixed-race African Americans strategically relocating, why did the community's most consistent identity claim across 200 years, across 40 documented groups scattered from Louisiana to Delaware, never include African heritage? In Louisiana courts, in 1837 and 1849, Redbone community members were challenged on the grounds that they were of color. They did not claim African ancestry. They claimed something else. They won. The court found them legally white. That is, a community protecting a narrative. But protecting it from what? The second theory is more complicated and considerably older than the DNA evidence. Researchers studying the Melungeon and Redbone communities have long noted a pattern that goes beyond Louisiana, beyond South Carolina, beyond any single state's history. The same handful of surnames, Goins, Collins, Gibson, Perkins, appear not just among the Redbones of Louisiana, but among the Lumbee of North Carolina, the Moors of Delaware, the Brass Ankles of South Carolina, the Free Issues of Virginia, and the Melungeons of eastern Tennessee. Roughly 40 such triracial isolate communities have been identified across the southeastern United States, all traceable by genealogy and DNA, to a founding population of approximately 200 individuals in 17th century Virginia, concentrated in the 1,619-1,720 window. Some researchers have proposed that these groups may have shared not just blood, but a name that in one interpretation, the term Melungeon, derives from the Kimbundu Angolan word Malungu, meaning roughly companion or fellow traveler. It is disputed. Linguists have offered other etymologies, but the possibility lingers that the free Angolans of Jamestown named themselves in their own language, and the name traveled with them across 2 centuries and a continent. This theory reframes the Redbones not as a Louisiana story, but as a chapter in the longest and most invisible migration in American history, the westward movement of a founding free black population ahead of the racial codes designed to extinguish them. Adapted, renamed. Moved, adapted, renamed. Moved, adapted, renamed, moved. But this theory still doesn't explain one stubborn thread. It doesn't explain the Portuguese claim. The word Moor. The copper-skinned, straight-haired, English-speaking people who told every outsider who asked that their blood came from somewhere across the Atlantic, not from Angola, not from Virginia, but from somewhere Mediterranean. That story didn't emerge from nothing. Oral traditions, this persistent, repeated across 40 communities over 2 centuries, don't. The third theory, and this is the one most researchers are hesitant to say out loud, begins not with genetics, but with the earliest written observations. When 19th century ethnographers first encountered the Redbone community in Louisiana, their notes were striking. One early researcher wrote that from the very beginning of his study, the community seemed to him to be of Mediterranean stock, not African American, not Native American, but Berber, Moorish, Carthaginian in his precise word. He described the hair as straight or wavy, the skin as copper or olive, and concluded that the people he was observing were, as he put it, most properly, Moors. The same description runs like a thread through Melungeon oral history in Appalachia. The word Portuguese appears in community self-identification stretching back to the 1700s. Researcher Brent Kennedy, one of the most prominent Melungeon scholars, has proposed that the Melungeon Redbone network may have absorbed a layer of Moorish, Portuguese, or Turkish ancestry arriving in North America through Francis Drake's 1,586 Roanoke voyage, people pulled from a Spanish slave ship en route to New Spain, set ashore on the Carolina coast, and never categorized by the colonial record-keeping that came after. Researchers are careful to frame this as hypothesis, not certainty. The genetic data has not produced a Mediterranean signal large enough to be statistically conclusive in these communities. The haplogroup frequencies don't confirm it, but they don't rule it out either. The European mitochondrial DNA could carry a Mediterranean origin. The African Y chromosomes could coexist with a North African founding lineage that has been absorbed into broader sub-Saharan categories by the resolution of commercial testing. The data doesn't confirm this. It only fails to eliminate it. And in genetics, the absence of proof is not the same thing as proof of absence. Imagine you are standing at the edge of the Sabine River in southwestern Louisiana in late autumn, 1815. The longleaf pines are tall and close. The air smells of river mud and resin. Somewhere behind you, a fire is burning. The neutral ground, the strip of land that has sheltered your family for a decade, that has no legal government, no census, no racial classification, is about to end. The Americans are coming with their forms. You hear English from the next clearing, but spoken with a cadence you have never heard quite explained. Your neighbors speak it too. You have always spoken it. Your parents spoke it. No one can say exactly when the family stopped speaking whatever language came before. A man arrives with paper and a quill. He does not ask your name first. He asks the question at the top of the column. What are you? You know what happens if you say the wrong thing. You know what happened to families in Virginia who said the wrong thing in 1806. In 1810, the land, the vote, the freedom, gone legally, permanently, in a single ink mark. You know what the right answer is, not the true answer. The safe answer. You write it down. Your children will write it down. Your grandchildren will carry it forward as identity, as inheritance, as the story they tell when anyone asks. 200 years later, a laboratory in Texas will extract DNA from a swab in a plastic tube and return a number, a haplogroup, a percentage, a piece of evidence that doesn't match the answer you wrote in that column. But it matches precisely the decision you made. This is the part the records don't explain, and the part the DNA, unexpectedly, clarifies. The Redbone people were not hiding their blackness. They were protecting their freedom. In 1837, and again in 1849, Louisiana courts challenged members of the Redbone community on the grounds that they were of color. In both cases, the courts found for the community, legally white, both times. That ruling was not a lie. It was a legal technology, a shield. While their relatives in Tennessee and Virginia were being reclassified as colored and stripped of land they had held for generations, The Redbones of Louisiana were standing in courtrooms and winning. The admixture is real. The African ancestry is real. The European ancestry is real. The near absence of documented native ancestry in the direct paternal and maternal lines is also real, and what it reveals is not a deception, but a strategy. Indian blood was a safer claim than African ancestry in the 19th century South, not because it was genetically precise, but because it was legally viable. The community's most controversial trait, their racial ambiguity, the thing that made census takers write question marks in the margin, was not a source of shame. It was the most sophisticated survival technology their ancestors possessed. A descendant of one of the founding Redbone families, speaking to a genealogical researcher in recent years, put it plainly, "We knew what we were. We just knew what to say." That knowledge, the gap between those two things, is not erasure. It is strategy. It is survival. It is 400 years of a community making itself legible to a system that was designed to destroy it, in exactly the language that system would accept. The Redbones are not, in the end, a Louisiana story, or even an American story. They are a proof of concept. The racial categories that Americans treat as ancient, biological, and fixed were, in most cases, invented within the last 200 years. The one-drop rule, the census column, the court ruling. These were technologies of classification, bureaucratic instruments designed to sort a messy human reality into a clean administrative ledger. Communities like the Redbones were the people the ledger was never designed to hold. Every time a DNA result comes back and doesn't match an oral tradition, we are tempted to call that a revelation, an exposure, a correction of the record. But what the Redbone DNA reveals is not a lie. It reveals a decision made in a specific parish, in a specific year, under specific pressure, with a quill in a stranger's hand. The Angolan founding lineage, the Moorish whisper, the Portuguese claim that will not die. The Y chromosomes that are African, the mitochondrial lines that are European, the Native American thread that the community gripped tightest and that the genetics can barely find, these are not contradictions. They are a portrait. America's oldest census forms are not records of who people were. They are records of what people needed to say to stay alive. The Redbone people were never what we thought, and what the DNA finally revealed is that the hidden history was never hidden at all. It was written in a language that census forms were never designed to read, in the only archive that cannot be seized, reclassified, or burned. The body, the blood, the line that runs unbroken from a river bottom in Louisiana to a laboratory swab in a plastic tube carrying, in its haplogroups and its admixture and its stubborn refusals, the full weight of every answer their ancestors chose not to give.